Hello, welcome back to Indus News with me, Osman Lone. Well, our top story today is from India, where the Supreme Court will hear petitions challenging New Delhi's decision of revoking the special status of occupied Kashmir. A Kashmiri politician, Shah Faisal, and activist Sheila Rashid have filed the pleas. Faisal and Sheila Rashid have been raising their voices against the complete clampdown in the occupied territory. Earlier, a criminal case was also filed against Sheila Rashid while Faisal was detained by Indian authorities for their activism. Meanwhile, India's crushing curfew in the valley has entered its 23rd day, with a total communication blackout still in place. Staying with the situation inside Kashmir, and Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has informed his Belgian counterpart about India's illegal revocation of occupied Kashmir's special status. In a telephone call between the two, Belgian Minister Didier Reynders said Qureshi's India steps violate UNSC resolutions and international law. Foreign Minister Reynders expressed concern over the human rights situation inside the occupied valley. He went on to say that further escalation would severely impact peace and security inside the region. Now, Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he and his Turkish counterpart, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, have agreed on joint steps to normalize the situation inside Idlib. He was meeting Erdogan in Moscow, and Putin said both countries are ready to take steps to ease tensions in Idlib's de-escalation zone. Russia is delivering the second battery of its S-400 missile system to Ankara. Turkey's defense ministry says the delivery of the second battery will take a month. Russia sent the initial parts of the system to Ankara in July, despite threats of US sanctions. Washington says the missile system is not compatible with NATO defenses, whereas Turkish President Erdogan is visiting Russia for talks with President Vladimir Putin. Now, in Iran, President Hassan Rouhani says the country has no intention of talking to the United States until it lifts all sanctions. Earlier, US President Donald Trump has said he's ready to meet Rouhani in a few weeks' time to end the confrontation over the 2015 nuclear deal. In a speech, Rouhani said Tehran has never wanted nuclear weapons and is always ready to hold talks. He said Iran will continue to scale back its commitments to the nuclear pact if illegal US sanctions are not lifted. Earlier, President Trump said Rouhani is a great negotiator, but Washington cannot let Tehran have nuclear weapons.
If the circumstances were correct or the right, I would certainly agree to that. But in the meantime, they have to be good players. You understand what that means. And they can't do what they were saying they're going to do, because if they do that, they're going to be met with really very violent force. We have no choice.
Now, as more and more world leaders have expressed concern over the rising tensions between the United States and Iran over the 2015 nuclear deal, Japan has also stepped in to try to mediate. Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono says his country will try to help ease tensions in the Middle East. He was meeting his Iranian counterpart Javad Zarif, who called on him in Tokyo. More in this report.
How are you? Very good.
Zarif kicked off his Asian tour in Beijing on Monday, presenting a 25-year plan to cement Iran's ties with its biggest Asian trading partner amid US sanctions. During his meeting with the Japanese foreign minister, Zarif said the two countries have special interests in the security of the energy market and stability in the Gulf.
It is necessary for us to engage. Also, Iran and Japan share common views on nuclear non-proliferation, and we need to have consultations that are best to maintain nuclear non-proliferation.
Being a close ally of the United States, Japan is trying to reduce tensions in the Persian Gulf.
Worried about tensions in the Middle East, and we hope to make some diplomatic efforts to ease the tension so we wanted to have a direct and a frank conversation with you today. So.
Zarif's visit to Japan comes on the heels of a surprise visit to the G7 summit in France over the weekend. Iran's top diplomat didn't meet US President Donald Trump, but French diplomats said the presence of the two men in the same place at least sparked hopes of a détente.
Well, we now go to Singapore, where we're joined by political analyst James Dorsey. James, thanks for your time. So straight into it, the surprise visit of Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif at the G7 summit raised some expectations of maybe a diplomatic breakthrough with the United States. But President Rouhani's reaction suggests otherwise. What do you think, James?
Pleasure to be with you. I think what you're seeing is both the United States and Iran do not want a military conflict. And both parties, given unease across the globe with the mounting tension in the Gulf, want to be seen to be willing to talk to one another. But if you look closely at what both President Trump and President Rouhani said, they haven't really moved an inch from their positions. So, with other words, Rouhani's position is Iran will only negotiate if the United States lifts the sanctions that were imposed on it after the United States walked away from the nuclear agreement. And President Trump said that Iran would have to agree to lifting its or eradicating its ballistic missiles program, not just its nuclear program, and between the lines suggested that Iran would also have to break its ties to various proxies in the Middle East. Now, there is no way that the United States at this point is going to lift sanctions, nor is there any way that Iran is going to agree to Trump's terms. What is a possible way out would be that if the United States were to ease pressure on Iran, for example, by granting various countries waivers for the import of Iranian oil.
Now, James, Mr. Zarif visited China yesterday and he had a meeting with his counterpart there. What do you think the chances are on China and Iran gathering support against the US on these decisions against Iran?
I don't know if there's a question of an anti-US axis. China and Iran have very close relations. Iran is very important to China, and certainly China is increasingly important to Iran, particularly given the sanctions. Both Iran has always been an anti-US regime. Relations between the Chinese and the Americans are deteriorating significantly because of trade and many other issues. I don't think it's a question of a new axis being formed as much as U.S. policy driving the Iranians even closer to the Chinese.
James, we've also got the Afghanistan issue, and it's in everyone's interest to have peace there. What do you think are the chances of the US and Iran cooperating in the Afghan peace process?
Well, I think that Iran's role is going to be secondary or minimal at this point. Obviously, Iran has a spoiling power. It can disrupt things, but Iran is not really a player in the negotiations, even though it certainly will want to protect the interests of the Hazaras, the Shiite Muslims in Afghanistan, in whatever settlement may be reached.
Well, that was political analyst James Dorsey speaking to us from Singapore. Thank you, James. Now, a Taliban spokesperson, Sohail Shaheen, says a peace agreement with the United States will be finalized soon. The fifth day of dialogue between the two parties has kicked off in Doha. Earlier, US envoy Zalmay Khalilzad rejected reports suggesting Washington would stop supporting Afghan armed forces after a peace deal with the Taliban. Khalilzad said all parties have agreed on the country's future and it depends on the intra-Afghan talks. Kurdish authorities in northeast Syria say their forces have begun withdrawing from outposts along the Turkish border under a US-Turkish deal for a buffer zone. The safe zone agreed by Washington and Ankara aims to create a barrier between the Turkish border and Syrian areas controlled by the Kurdish YPG forces. The Syrian Democratic Forces, spearheaded by the YPG, control much of north and east Syria after they seized territory from ISIS. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Turkish troops will soon enter northeast Syria. Now, fresh clashes between rebels and government forces have killed 53 combatants on both sides in northwestern Syria. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the fighting killed 23 government soldiers and 20 rebels. It said the clashes broke out after rebels attacked government forces and positions east of the town of Khan Sheikhoun. Earlier, Russian and Syrian government airstrikes killed 12 civilians in the northwestern province of Idlib. 27 others were wounded in the attack. Now, Iraq's leaders have condemned suspected Israeli drone strikes on paramilitary groups. In a statement, President Barham Saleh and Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi have said the Israeli raids on Sunday were an attack on Iraq's sovereignty. The Foreign Ministry also released a statement saying the government will not allow Iraq to be turned into a conflict zone. Israel carried out drone attacks on Beirut on Sunday and hit a Palestinian group based in southern Syria yesterday. Now, tensions are rising between Israel and the group Hezbollah once again after 2 Israeli drones crashed in Beirut. Now, UN peacekeepers are patrolling the streets of Lebanon while Israeli jets patrol the border. But residents remain defiant, going about their business as usual, saying they're ready to protect their land themselves. More in this report.
The threat of war is looming over Lebanon once more. On Sunday, Hezbollah issued a stern warning to Israel, saying it would attack Israeli troops on the Lebanese border if it continued to violate the country's airspace. The sentiment behind the warning has been echoed by the residents of Lebanon's border towns.
The resistance is here, and as long as the resistance is protecting us, we will be just fine. The Israelis have become scared of us. We stand on the border fence. Do they dare stand? Times have changed.
Many say they didn't leave their lands during the July war of 2006, and they will not flee if they are attacked again today.
Everybody fears war. At the end of the day, that's natural. There's no one that is not afraid for himself and his family. But at the end of the day, the choice is living in humiliation or dying with your head held high. And we will die with our heads held high.
Lebanon's President Michel Aoun has said his country has a right to defend itself and likened Israeli drone strikes to an act of war. Israeli troops posted along the border with Lebanon are also on high alert. 100,200 Lebanese citizens died in the month-long July war 13 years ago.
Now, as the war continues in Yemen, Saudi-led coalition forces have shot down a Houthi drone launched towards the kingdom from inside Yemen. In a statement, Saudi-led coalition forces spokesman Colonel Turki al-Maliki said the drone was destroyed in Yemeni airspace. He said the drone was aimed at the southwestern city of Khamis Mosheit. Al-Maliki also said continued attacks by Houthis will end in failure. Now, moving on to Sudan, where flash floods from the Nile River have wreaked havoc in at least 17 of the country's 18 states. 62 people have been killed over the past week, while thousands have been displaced. The crisis couldn't come at a worse time as Sudan ushers in a political transition to try to garner civilian rule. More in this report.
Heavy rains hit Sudan last week, causing the Nile River to overflow. The flash floods that followed have devastated most of the country, displacing 200,000 people and killing 62. Internally displaced persons say they are living without proper shelter and are in urgent need of help.
We urgently need NGOs, the government or anyone else to provide us with shelter because we have young children. Some of them are under 10 or 12 years old. We urgently need shelter because winter is coming.
The stagnant water has become a serious health hazard, becoming a fertile breeding ground for mosquitoes. Meanwhile, the UN has warned there is an urgent need to prevent the spread of waterborne disease. This is all a unique phenomenon in the country, which has never seen such flooding before.
There were no floods in all of the area of Wad Ramli, but now when you look around, everything is gone. Thank God there were no lives lost, but all our belongings are gone and we are left with nothing.
The IDPs say they are anxiously waiting for floodwaters to recede so that they can begin rebuilding their lives. But with the rainy season predicted to last until October and winter fast approaching, things could get worse before they improve.
Now in China, and it's accused the US of hyping up the South China Sea situation. Earlier, the Pentagon said China is interfering in waters claimed by Vietnam. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Geng Shuang said the US has made warrantless criticism against China. According to ship tracking data, a Chinese survey vessel extended its activities to an area closer to Vietnam's coast. This angered the US and Australia. The vessel first entered Vietnam's exclusive economic zone last month, triggering a standoff between Vietnam and China. Vietnam demands that Beijing remove the vessel. The two countries are engaged in a dispute over the potentially energy-rich waters, which are also a busy shipping lane. China has also expressed reservations over the G7 statement on the current unrest in Hong Kong. The G7 leaders meeting in France backed Hong Kong's autonomy as laid out in a 1984 agreement between Britain and China. China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Geng Shuang says the G7 is meddling and harboring evil intentions for Hong Kong. Shuang says Beijing has repeatedly said the affair is China's internal matter. Hong Kong has been racked by more than 2 months of protests over a controversial extradition bill. Now, in England, Britain's Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage has offered Prime Minister Boris Johnson an electoral pact if he goes for a no-deal divorce from the EU. Meanwhile, opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn says he will do everything possible to avoid a no-deal Brexit. More than 3 years since the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, Brexit remains up in the air. Options range from an acrimonious divorce on October 31st and an election to an amicable exit, or even another referendum. Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage said his party will fight for every seat in the general elections if the government tries to pass the existing withdrawal agreement. But he went on to say that the Brexit Party will work with Prime Minister Boris Johnson if he pursues a no-deal Brexit. Opposition Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn met senior lawmakers from other parties to discuss tactics. He said an exit from the EU without an agreement will leave Britain at the mercy of President Donald Trump and US corporations. US National Security Advisor John Bolton says President Donald Trump may meet his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky later this month. During a visit to Kiev, Bolton paid respects to Ukrainian servicemen killed in a conflict with eastern separatists. The advisor is the first senior US official visiting Ukraine since Zelensky came to power. Trump is expected to travel to Poland and Denmark on August 31st. Now, in India, a road accident in the northern state of Uttar Pradesh claimed the lives of 16 people. Police say 3 children were among those who died after a truck collided with 2 cars on a highway. 6 others were also injured in the accident. Officials said the injuries were immediately taken to hospital. Now, torrential rain and hail have drenched Spain's capital, Madrid, causing flash flooding inside the city. The floods have disrupted daily life and caused thousands of dollars worth of damage. The Spanish subway department has declared several metro stations and highways closed. The state meteorological agency predicts more rains before the end of the summer. Now, 19 US states and the District of Columbia have sued the Trump administration to block a sweeping new immigration rule. The rule will indefinitely detain migrant families looking to settle in the United States from October. More in this report.
The lawsuit filed in a Los Angeles court is the first in an expected flurry of litigation challenging the rule. The new regulation seeks to scrap the Flores settlement, a 1997 agreement limiting children's immigration detention to 20 days. Meanwhile, the U.S. government has asked the Supreme Court to lift a court order preventing it from enforcing a different directive. This bars almost all asylum applications at the U.S.-Mexico border, requiring asylum seekers to first pursue safe havens in a third country. A California court issued a preliminary injunction blocking the rule last month.
Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro says he is open to the G7 aid meant to fight the Amazon fires if French President Emmanuel Macron withdraws his insults against him. Bolsonaro's remarks come amid an escalating war of words with French President Macron over the wildfires in the Amazon rainforest. The dispute also threatens the Mercosur trade deal between the European Union and South American countries. Earlier, a top Brazilian official had rejected the G7 countries' offer of $22 million to combat the fires. Bolsonaro accused Macron of treating Brazil like a colony. Now, in China, Tibetan nomads play a central role in the ecosystem protection as this preserves their way of life. Now they're working with conservationists to protect the source of China's Yellow River. More in this report.
For centuries, the peak of Amnir has been a destination for Buddhist pilgrimage. But as global temperatures rise, the mountain's snowcap has also started melting. Because the mountain's glaciers are the main source of China's Yellow River, this could have serious ecological consequences.
After our observation and interviews with the local people who are living here, and there are big changes with the glaciers, and the glaciers are retreating within the last 10 years.
The issue is close to the hearts of the people of Qinghai province. Tibetan folklore says once Amnir Mechan's glaciers disappear, the god of the mountain will be gone, and so will his blessings. That's why when environmental NGOs started working to preserve the glacier, Tibetan nomads were quick to jump on board.
When there's more snow on the mountain, it makes me very happy. But when there's less snow, it makes me really sad.
Everyone contributes in whatever way they can. Tibetan nomad Sangdan regularly scans the mountain for signs of snow leopards, an important indicator of the status of Amnir Mechan's ecosystem. Scientists and conservationists say cultural values and religious beliefs are pivotal in preserving the source of the Yellow River.
Now, thousands of tourists visit Tuscany every year to see its white beaches of Rossano Solvay. But did you know where they got their nickname from? Well, it's a factory specializing in sodium bicarbonate. But to the annoyance of environmental activists, it's not just the name they owe to the factory. More in this report.
Holidaymakers splash in the turquoise waters of the Rossano Solvay beach in Tuscany and lays on its pristine white sands. Most are fully aware the picture-perfect swimming spot owes its allure to a nearby factory. Questions have lingered for decades over why the sea and sand have such startling colors. Some say it could be caused by heavy metals being released into the water by the plant.
We've heard that here is a soda fabric, so that's the reason that the sand is bleached. We've read something at the internet, so that must not be a problem.
The beach is named after the Solvay factory that produces soda ash for making glass as well as sodium bicarbonate. The plant strenuously denies polluting the surrounding coastline.
Most of them are solid particles that are discharged through a river into the sea with an authorization given by the Ministry of Environment, which provides for a series of periodic inspections carried out by the company itself, Solvay, but also by bodies such as ARPAT and the ISPRA.
Environmentalists have also deplored the gutting of limestone hills near San Vincenzo and the mass extraction of rock salt. They say the famous White Beach is nothing more than an artificial construct, one which still offers holidaymakers a slice of paradise.
Now, decades ago, scientists predicted flying cars and robots that would overtake mundane human tasks like doing the dishes and maybe the vacuuming. Now, in Singapore, there's evidence to support that this claim can be seen as autonomous buses drive tourists around the coastal district of Sentosa. More in this report.
Under the sweltering Singapore sun, an autonomous shuttle bus drives up by itself and allows a line of tourists to board. The island state, ranked second behind the United States in its preparedness for driverless vehicles, has begun to tentatively test a fleet of shuttles. Singapore's testing of the technology is being closely watched as tech firms and automakers race to build self-driving cars.
Authorities are looking forward for this, and in fact they are very supportive in our development, and they also give us a lot of help in establishing all the road regulation and establishing all the testing procedure. Like the TR68 that recently they published this year, they actually help us to bring the autonomous system into the public faster.
On Monday, the first day of the trial, there were almost as many bus stewards as passengers, making sure seat belts were tightly fastened. After a series of mishaps at home and abroad with the new technology, the company behind the latest test says it is taking no chances with passenger safety. For driverless vehicle operators, safety is crucial.
Have to look out for traffic, any hazards, which some drivers, they violate the rules, which we need to take extra precautions because they doesn't know how these autonomous buses are working on. And most importantly, I have to ensure my passengers are on safety.
People are expecting to find out soon when the buses will be part of everyday scenery around the city.
Now let's take a look at what's happening in the world of business. And France says it will scrap recently imposed taxes on US tech giants as soon as the world's developed economies find a way to uniformly tax them. Earlier, French and US officials drafted out an agreement over the issue on the sidelines of the G7 summit yesterday. US President Donald Trump has threatened to impose retaliatory tariffs on French wines. President Emmanuel Macron says France will tax big tech firms until the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development establishes standardized rules. He said France will refund any overpaid taxes once the OECD framework is in place. The framework is expected to be unveiled next year. Now, a US court has fined pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson $572 million. The fine was found because of the company liable for fueling an opioid addiction epidemic in Oklahoma State by deceptively marketing their painkillers. The court ruled the drug maker's actions compromised the health and safety of thousands of US citizens. It said the payment will be used for the care and treatment of opioid addicts in Oklahoma. State's Attorney General Michael Hunter said the pharma giant's misleading marketing led to a surge of overdose deaths. Now, European stock markets have opened lower despite a recovery on Asian indexes after US President Donald Trump predicted a trade deal with China. Tracking Wall Street, the Shanghai Composite has closed nearly 1.5% up. Investors were further encouraged by the return of Chinese industrial firms to profit in July. the Chinese yuan has slipped to another 11-year low, bringing its overall devaluation this month to over 3.5%. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 also gained about 1%, but the Hang Seng Index was flat, with growing political instability in Hong Kong. Well, it's 30 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all the news for now, but do stay with us as I'll be back at 10 p.m. for the headlines on the hour. Bye-bye.